Hello, good night, good morning. What day is it? I'm glad we're all friends, and I know so many of you so well. Is the sound level good? I'm not shouting at you? Okay, good. And thanks to the heroic AV team who got it working at the last minute. I had given up hope. Great. So, in fact, this book is not really about people who have 7 or 8 kids, although it is. It's about why people would have even 1 or 2 children at all, because increasingly people aren't having even 1 or 2 children. So keep your eye on the ball. That's the story here. So you already know, I think you know, that America is in the midst of a population collapse, like a complete and total collapse. 2023 marked the lowest fertility rate ever recorded in the United States, 1.63 expected lifetime births per woman. That number is not explained by COVID. It is the culmination of a decades-long implosion of birth rates. A total fertility rate of 2.1 births per woman is required for a population to replace itself. So you know this already. Here's a slide of the global TFRs. Just so you can see, this is a global problem. And we don't really look very different from most of the rest of the globe. So global convergence. And you'll notice there's really only a couple of places on the map that are anywhere above 2 at this point. So the United States TFR, the number of births per woman, has generally been below replacement. In fact, since 1971, probably don't know this, and it's consistently been below replacement since 2008. Below replacement fertility is bad for a variety of reasons. You can probably guess them. A shrinking working population, we're already there. Economic and political catastrophes, and also just the human loss, right? So this book is actually motivated by this question. So a single insight inspired this book. If you're interested in childbearing in a world of falling birth rates, talk to people who have kids anyway. Don't take the word of people who are people who don't, but talk to people who have kids anyway. And so I'm actually going to give you a nice visual on this. So I found this Twitter thread, which I really liked a while ago. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm up to. So there's this guy that goes around Miami Beach, and he interviews people who are over the age of 40 and are still fit. He tries to figure out what they're up to. And I realize that's pretty much what I'm up to. So if you want to know about fitness, talk to people who have gotten in shape. Don't take the word of people who are not in shape. If you want to know about healthy eating, talk to people who eat well. Having kids is hard, so ask the outliers what drives them, what they're doing, and what they've learned. So we're in luck. It turns out that 5% of American women are these outliers. They're still having families as large as their early American sisters, and it seemed to me it might be a good idea to go find out what the heck they're doing, why they do it, and what they think it means. And so that's the whole premise of this book. So Hannah's Children is a narrative account of the first qualitative study of American women who are, the way I put it, immune from low birth rates, right? So this global catastrophe, you look around the world, where are there people who are not suffering low birth rates? And these are the people who are not suffering low birth rates. This is a small but not insignificant. It's not as small as you would think among women in their 40s alone today in the United States. In their 40s, between 40 and 49, it's about 1 million women. So 5% is not that small of a number. So these are women who I say are like the biblical Hannah, who see their children as blessings from God, expressions of divine goodness, and the purpose of their marriages. But it turned out after I talked to all these people and put the data together, it was also something more. The women in my study gave witness to another sort of reply to the crisis of the West, not a plan or a policy, but a message that the salvation of the world is in the birth of a child. And if you're wondering what the policy relevance is here, I'm going to unpack that for you in a minute. All right. Okay, so this quote that's up on this slide is from an early reader of this book. An early reader wrote to me, and she said, "I'm only halfway through your book, but I'm going to have another baby, God willing, in part because of it. It's like I'm reconverting," she said, or like Chesterton. I need to travel around the world to get back to where I was. The book isn't taking me around the world, it's bringing me back. My friend was referencing Chesterton's masterwork, The Everlasting Man, so I'm guessing a bunch of you know this book, and if you don't know this book, you should read this book before you read my book, and then you should soon read my book after. This is a book which changed my life when I read it in college. I actually hadn't noticed the similarities between my work and this book before she mentioned it, but like Chesterton, I aim to take what is the most ordinary thing in the world, a life-giving marriage, and present it as something new, alien, as something worthy of discovery. Like you're this explorer and you go around the world and you go, hey, look, I found life over there, right? Like I found life on Mars. I found people still having children. This was the idea. Okay. So what could be more alien indeed? So Chesterton talked about a world in which Christianity was covered by names and memories, the familiarity of which becomes a falsification. So what if the familiarity of having children hides or falsifies the most important truths? Chesterton believed that Christianity was misunderstood in the West because it was taken for granted, that it was hidden by ordinariness. Like we all kind of know what it is, right? That people lived off of its bounty, he thought, without knowing that Christianity was an oasis. Only from afar, he said, could you see plainly that Christianity is the only green thing in a whole desert of death. So here's a long quote from Chesterton, but it's so good, it's worth quoting in full. He said, the next best thing to being really inside Christendom is to be really outside it. And a particular point of it is that the popular critics of Christianity are not really outside it. Their criticism has taken on a curious tone, as of a random and illiterate heckling. So we're going to come back to the random and illiterate hecklers in a minute. It is well with the boy, he said, when he lives on his father's land, and it's well with him again when he's far enough away to look back on it and see it as a whole. But these people, these are critics of Christianity, he said, these people have gotten into an intermediate state. They've fallen into an intervening valley from which they can see neither the heights beyond them nor the heights behind. They cannot get out of the penumbra of Christian controversy. They cannot be Christians, and they cannot leave off being anti-Christians. Their whole atmosphere is an atmosphere of a reaction, sulks, perversity, petty criticism. They live in the shadow of the faith, but they've lost the light of faith. All right. So Hannah's Children presents the exception, the 5%, as the exception that it is, the only green thing in a desert of death. To the unfamiliar, the life-giving family emerges in these pages as a strange alien being. The outlier, the anomaly, as foreign as a remote Asiatic cult, to quote Chesterton. And my arrow landed. So one reviewer, which is up here, one reviewer at Slate magazine said, reading about their lives is like reading about a bunch of Arctic explorers or professional athletes, superhuman people who resign themselves to sacrificing everything else to a goal. She said, but as I made it through the book, I was surprised to finally feel as if I understood where these women are coming from. So that's a high praise. The analogy with, this is just filler. The analogy with Chesterton's masterwork holds up only insofar as the life-giving family rises and falls with true faith. By this I mean an if and only if statement. If wherever we find true faith, we also find the life-giving family. And wherever we find the life-giving family, we also find participation in the true faith. Like Chesterton, in these pages, I try to show that when we really do make this imaginative effort to see the whole thing from the outside, we find that it really looks like what is traditionally said about it on the inside. Chesterton wrote, the minute we are impartial about it, we know why people are partial to it. And what I mean is the relationship between giving life, it's having children, and true faith. So when I was a kid, people used to say, "Are you Catholic or Mormon?" You used to see a big family. Is it Catholic or Mormon, right? Today, you're going to hear a lot of people say, we don't really need to have faith to sustain childbearing, right? Well, you're going to hear this. We don't really need to confront this chasm of unbelief to fix the greatest crisis of the day. So I don't think you should fall for it. It's not true. It's more correct to say that the moment we're really impartial about the role of faith in the life-giving family, the more we know why children are absolutely and essentially an object of faith, what is exactly traditionally said about children on the inside, blessings from God and expressions of divine goodness. So just to give you a flavor of what you'll find in this book, I'm going to introduce you to two women. So first is Hannah, the eponymous Hannah. Just when you read a little bit about Hannah, you'll see why she opens the book. I interviewed Hannah with her best friend Esther, and Hannah had a 12-month-old with her, and her best friend Esther had a little 2-week-old baby with her, her 9th. Her friend Esther had grown up in a big family, but Hannah had not. And Hannah said, I didn't even want to get married at one point in my life. At one point in my life, I could not see myself married. I thought I would be like that aunt, the medicine woman who doesn't get married. And she laughed and she continued, where I was in my early 20s, just doing my own thing, for whatever I was at that point in my life, most people who are in their academic years and their professional careers are doing their own thing. So keep that in mind, doing their own thing. And having children was not something that would, if you're a somewhat level-headed person in the world, you'd say this doesn't fit into this lifestyle. Doesn't fit into this lifestyle. You couldn't do this. It doesn't make sense. Remember, now she has 7 children. Because people think on rational levels, and I think maybe a little bit more super rational thinking has to infiltrate the masses to know that things are possible, like possibilities of expansion in your life. She was from a Reformed Jewish background where she didn't even want to get married at one point in her life. She said something, well, you grow up and you do Jewish things, but you don't really believe anything. As a young woman in her 20s, her search led her to the idea that children are the meaning of everything. She said, we were searching. My husband and I were searching. For us, we'd both been around the block. We'd explored. We'd dated in our public school, secular life. We were very clear and very focused that one of our main goals of getting married was to begin a family right away and to have a large family. But on a deeper level, in my own kind of quest for meaning and purpose, I was very into this concept of infinity. I did a lot of meditation and nirvana, things like that, the search for what's the meaning of everything. And I feel like it came down to the core of the answer was that children are this key to infinity. And especially being Jewish, how much more so, because this is a link and a chain that we've had from Moses and from Abraham and from Noah and from Adam. This link, continuing this legacy by having children as a way to be part of that chain of infinity. And to me, that was it. There is nothing else that is going to do that. Such a conclusion might have been reached on human terms alone. That we pressed her, right? And she said her discernment was certainly nourished by devotion to God after her conversion. She said, yes, it became something through my learning and through my meditation and through my wanting to serve God as a Jewish woman, that having children is the answer, that I was being called to do this as a servant of God. She traced out her reasons that had to do with higher things, ultimate ends like Pascal's reasons of the heart. For Hannah, those super reasons gave order to the reasoning about other life choices, directing them toward what is eternal. Hannah drew a contrast between two ways of life, her old self doing her own thing and her new self, and it provides the best possible introduction to the women in my volume. My subjects in general describe their choice to have children as a deliberate rejection of an autonomous, customized, self-regarding lifestyle in favor of a way of life intentionally limited by the demands of motherhood. In general, they were motivated by a deeply biblical worldview, characterized by trust in God and hope in his providence. Like Hannah, my subjects groped for descriptions of the life they had rejected, where the number and the timing of children were fitted into a narrative of self-identity. They thought of themselves as fitting into a greater narrative of childbearing. They spoke of self-sacrifice, but not of losing themselves. Like Hannah, the other women I met extended this contrast to their marriages, to their children, and to the social order more broadly. They believe that the sustained effect of living with needy young children for an extended period of life fosters other regarding virtues necessary for egalitarianism, civic friendship, such as empathy, generosity, solidarity, and self-denial. Like Hannah, my subjects described a life of, we'll say, religious seriousness, in which they allowed their beliefs about God and the meaning of life to shape their own hearts and desires. And finally, like Hannah, they had adopted a posture of openness to children as a way of life and not as a mere season. All right, so how openness as a way of life translates into each person's life look very different. And that's why you need to meet 12 or 13 women and not just one. So I'm going to introduce you to Danielle, who's the mother of 7. So Danielle illustrated this principle of openness, and this becomes very important on the social science side. I will not discuss that much tonight, but if anybody wants to catch me later, we'll see. I mean, just for instance, if you're going to do a survey of fertility intentions or desires, and your guiding principle is a kind of openness to God's will, how many children do you plan to have? How many children do you expect to have? Those are meaningless questions, right? So all of the survey data on this is certainly flawed. All right, that's just a start. So Danielle was pregnant with her 7th when I met her. She met her husband in medical school. They did not set out to have a big family any more than Hannah had. She had a great story. She said she really loved medical school, but when she did residency, she thought it was fairly devastating. She developed horrible anxiety, and she hated it. She said, so when I was finished, I was so thankful to be done, and it was right before my son was born. So I finished the end of June. He was born in August, and in some ways, I entered motherhood in this hard state because those years have been so difficult. But it was such a mercy to not feel like I had to do the same thing that had been so hard for 3 years. And it was the first time in my life, she said, that I hadn't just gone from one thing to the next. Really important. So this is very important for women's labor market. I didn't go from one thing to the next. I came up for air, and I realized I don't want to keep doing this. And I really, really didn't want to keep doing this. It wasn't something where I said, like, oh, I don't want to do the fellowship, but I'd be happy to work in primary care or something. I really wanted nothing to do with practicing medicine. It's a great story. The next chapter in my book, by the way, is about a woman who stays practicing medicine. I'm not against practicing medicine. It was a great story. At that point, she said, I just became this sort of surprise stay-at-home mom. And then I enjoyed my son. I enjoyed being his mom, I think, in a lot of ways. So this is a huge part of growing up female in America, right? That you don't plan for this thing that you come to discover you love only after it happens. She went on, it sort of sounds ridiculous in terms of planning. We just sort of kept liking the kids that we were having and liking having kids and enjoying the little years. I think there was some degree to which we kind of thought, well, the kids are little, so if we're going to have more like this, they should probably be close. And I don't know when we tipped over from that sort of having our kids close together to, oh gosh, there's really kind of a lot of them. But it certainly was not our plan, no romantic candlelight dinner, sketching out our plan with 7 kids. I just heard from somebody who knows Danielle, and these are all pseudonyms, by the way, and she has 9 now. This was 5 years ago when I interviewed her. So she said, we would have been the most shocked, probably. Now I'm sort of like, this is what I'm doing all the time anyway. So there was no impetus not to have more, So no impetus not to have more. This becomes incredibly important. I'll tell you what I mean. Her no impetus not to have more echoed this posture of openness that I heard across my travels. People were open. They didn't necessarily mean they were always trying for another one, but it meant that they didn't close the door permanently. The moms that I met did not, in general, have a grand vision for how many kids they wanted, but they didn't close the door. The door wasn't closed. The openness allowed for a reassessment of costs and benefits at later stages of childbearing and time for desires to be reshaped. Danielle said, I do think we sort of crossed that point where I'm thinking, like, if we're going to have one or two more, is that going to be a game changer at this point? I don't think so. She did have two more. And I think I would be open to that. And it feels easier to be open at this point than at other inflection points. Oh, she explained that with more children, the lifestyle cost of an additional child becomes a lot smaller. Your life is already rearranged. One or two more kids won't be a game changer. Her story recalled the claim made by demographers, which I put on the slide for you, that the regime change between old birth rates and new birth rates arrived with a seemingly tiny alteration in the childbearing decision tree, whether couples were deciding when to stop having children or when to start. So in the past, after having a few children at the beginning of marriage, the issue was to adopt contraception or some type of family planning to avoid future pregnancies. But beginning in the 1960s, with the arrival of the hormonal contraceptives, couples began marriage by postponing children, and the basic fertility decision then was to stop contracepting to start your family. If the opportunity cost of starting a family, the lifestyle cost of switching from doing your own thing to starting your family is a lot higher than the cost of additional children down the line, then that regime change, that tiny alteration, could be monumental. The stories that we heard supported this thesis. Women talked about the enormousness of the personal and domestic adjustments called for by having a first, and they insisted that the second and third babies were almost as hard. But it doesn't keep getting harder. There's a peak cost in terms of the personal and lifestyle challenges of having children. Hannah told me 3 is the hardest number of children to have, and many people said something similar. The women in our study had a general sense that after 2 or 3 additional children were easier to have. Danielle spelled this out more explicitly than anyone else. If we're going to have 1 or 2 more kids, is that going to be a game changer? I don't think so. Besides eating out, she mentioned the size of her car, the shift to traveling less. I feel like that ship has sailed, she said. It wasn't wistful, it was just matter of fact. Since she and her husband had already made these adjustments, having 1 or 2 more children wouldn't impact their lifestyle very much. And they expected to enjoy 1 or 2 more a great deal, maybe even more than the first ones. So a particular type of cost-benefit reasoning began to tell in favor of additional children for some of our study families after a 4th or a 5th child. The fixed costs, such as a bigger car or giving up a second income, had already been borne. The variable costs, personal and lifestyle related, became smaller. And the expected value to the family in terms of excitement, joy, and love seemed to grow larger with additional children. So to sum up, the women in my sample ranged in age from 32 to 71. The number of children they had ranged from 5, that was the minimum for my sample, reasons for all of that, we could talk about it, to 15 with an average of 7. I know, the average was 7. They were Baptists, evangelicals, non-denominational Christians, Presbyterians, Mormons, Jewish, and Roman Catholic. Did we lose the slides? All right. All right, there's one. All right, that's good. All right. 45% of my sample came from families of origin large enough to fit the study sample with 4 or more siblings, but 55% came from smaller families. 20% had just 1 sibling growing up, and 7% had no siblings growing up. They came from all walks of life, some living in the nation's wealthiest, most elite zip codes, and others living paycheck to paycheck in the foothills of the American Rockies. The narratives taught us that falling birth rates are not a cost problem, not in the way we normally think about a cost problem. The relevant obstacle to choosing a child, they said, was the cost of missing out on the other things you could have done with your time, with your money, or with your life. The price they really leaned into, the real cost of children, was what you had to give up. They talked about sleepless nights for 20 years, about giving up comforts and plans and hobbies and status and a clean house, giving up alone time, achievements and freedom, giving up meeting your own needs. One mom said, having children and parenting is all about living for someone else, not for yourself. The costs they granted were big and consequential, but the reason for missing out, their purpose, was much bigger than the losses. They would give up something of themselves, they said, but their children would give it back to them with interest. It's the paradox of the cross, one woman told me. They had a reason to have children big enough to give up their lives more than once, and that reason came from deep trust in God, love for their spouses, or love for their children, and often all three. And anyway, they said, the losses weren't the end of the story. Their children were their greatest blessings. They told me in so many words how their children had saved their lives, saved their marriages, and saved their souls. By their own accounts, their words, not mine, they had been saved from immaturity, loneliness, selfishness, and uselessness. And so had their children and their husbands. They told stories of healing and growth. We've seen miracles, Esther told us. The upshot of all this, they believed the nation would be happier and more virtuous if we spent more of our adult lives taking care of children, and if our children grew up with more siblings. For the women in this rare demographic, children are blessings, expressions of God's goodness, and the purpose of her marriage. These are the incentives that tip the scales in favor of choosing children. The data that I heard helps to explain why policy solutions to raise birth rates have not worked in the past and are not likely to work in the future. Which slide I'm on right now. What then might help reverse the trend of low birth rates? The testimonies in this volume, offered by women at all levels of engagement with paid work, suggest that we look to the strength and vitality of living religious communities. It seems to be in the temple where we find the reasons of the heart that justify the life-altering personal sacrifices that come with having children. So a certain type of religious liberty is a family policy, the only family policy that has a chance. But to have that chance, it has to be thick freedom of religion, not a mere freedom of worship, the bare right to spend an hour of the week at church or synagogue on the weekend. Religion isn't free, that can't assist families in passing on the faith and tradition to their children. So returning to Chesterton's observation, who are the critics of curious tone, the random and illiterate hecklers today? So I want to take a stab at this. Some today, bearing the mantle of conservative, tell us that we can revive the family and birth rates without reviving faith. So this was in the middle of Orrin Cass's lecture in March. This was his case made explicitly at the First Things lecture delivered at the Heritage Foundation. He said that, we could convince people like it was their patriotic duty to have children. Along the same lines, you will hear others urge that we should not be afraid to just use the state power for the right end, such as the family, as if the state has the power to revive the family. And finally, others, you'll hear this too, among our fellow conservatives, others will urge that our mediating institutions, such as schools and universities and hospitals, should be religious in inspiration, maybe, let's use the word classical, or they should be liberal arts, but not too religious. Being too religious would be to hinder in a secular world the project of renewal that unites all of us who are modern discontents of modernity in search of a renewed common good. This is illiterate heckling indeed. The task of Christendom is to understand its role among critics of modernity, claiming to have some religion-free insight into the salvation of the world. But these people have gotten into an intermediate state where they can see neither the heights beyond them nor the heights behind. They cannot get out of the penumbra of Christian controversy. They cannot be Christians, and they cannot leave off being anti-Christians. So Orrin Cass believes that people can and will value children for human reasons and for human incentives. But they fail to see that such a proposition is rationalizable only within the remnant of a grasping Christianity. Indeed, most of today's pro-family advocates, many of them are doing very good work, but they fail to assess their own commitment for what it is, which is springing from religious piety. Others will not value children without the same faith. So they can't leave off being Christians when they value children for their own sakes. But when they tell us the family can be saved without religious revival, they cannot leave off being anti-Christians. In reality, the world has always subjected children to the tests of adult ends, like wealth, power, and comfort. From the ancients to the Gnostics, to the disciples of Thomas Malthus, and that great eugenicist John Maynard Keynes. This is why a faith that places the God-child at the center has been a scandal. Did I lose the slides? No, they're still there. Okay, good. It's like a conference going on. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against finding a common purpose with the secular critics of modernity. But what I'm against is losing the narrative. Secular conservatives are with us because they have perceived something correct in the truths of the faith, not because their merely human story has brought forth any new insights. So Chesterton put it this way: nobody except the messengers of the gospel has any gospel. Nobody else has any good news, for the simple reason that nobody else has any news. He's great. There is nothing new in secular humanism, and anything truly life-saving and life-giving is Christian, not humanist. The only green thing in a desert of death. So we have to close the loop, I say, and play our role. Family policy on its own has no chance of meaningful success in an unchristian land. What this means first is that the evangelization and salvation of the world is found in our families, and specifically in our births. The way we give witness to the adorability of the infant God and to our faith more broadly is by bringing forth new life and testifying to its desirability when it's no longer a choice for us. So supporting our children, our grandchildren, our friends' children, prioritizing pro-life work, including adoption and foster care. We have to be a people slavishly devoted to the child, to never tire of testifying to the intrinsic worth of children from the moment of conception. Second, the resources to have children never can come from anywhere else but the germ of faith. Mothers and fathers, grandparents, all who participate in the life-giving family are a kind of spring, right? So nations and powers can try to wall it off. Like you have a spring flow, you can try to wall it off, you can cover it over, but you can't summon it, cannot command it. The source of the life-giving family, whatever familiar falsifications hide the truth, is simply not summonable. It's only protectable. You got to protect it, so the state has to protect it. This was ever true, but modernity, particularly through modern contraceptive technology, made children fully opt in, right? Or opt in. So we have to examine the reasons why people would opt in. If the familiarity of love and then marriage and then the baby carriage, if that has any romance left for an exhausted West, a West that subordinates children to adult fulfillment, that romance, although it's defective, it has its roots in the Christian assertion that the child is desirable, the child is lovable, and that the God-child must be worshipped. Indeed, when the life-giving family is seen from the outside, in the sense of seeing it as a whole, against the backdrop of other historic things, like those total fertility rates you've just seen, today's demographic trends, and these are Chesterton's words, it stands out from the background like a supernatural thing. Right? It's like a miracle. You look at the whole globe and you say, where is it not like this? You go, oh, aha, right there, there's an oasis. What do you find in the oasis? It's always the same. You find religious people. So it stands out from the background. So this is Chesterton's word about Christianity. It stands out. It stands out like a supernatural thing. He said, it does not fade into the rest with the colors of Impressionism. The life-giving family stands like a red cross on a white shield, he said, a thing without rival resemblance, still as old, as new as it is old. So in this book, you will read about a small but not insignificant demographic group, women in contemporary America, like the biblical Hannah, who see their children as their purpose, their contribution, and their greatest blessing. Their stories are profoundly relevant for the demographic policy dilemma, as well as for our deeper public dialogue about individualism, the character of our political order, and the future of the American experiment. The Hannahs in this volume give witness to another sort of reply to the crisis of the West. Whether you've had one child or 10, I invite you into this world and to see the childbearing family as the foreign thing that it is in this world, and to know, maybe for the first time, the childbearing family as a supernatural thing. Thank you.
Questions? Hello? There you go. All right, so did everybody hear me? There are 3 microphones here, so we will, Bishop, you want to?
Thank you. I want to ask about natural family planning. I get asked about that sometimes.
Yep.
The church distinguishes between natural family planning and artificial contraception. That, as we know, Humanae Vitae condemns artificial contraception. Natural family planning is approved by the church.
Yep.
But people will say, what's the difference, though, in terms of they're both a contraceptive mentality in terms of trying to avoid having children? Did that come up in your book at all, or do any of the women talk about natural family planning, or is that, no, we're not going to use natural or artificial, we're just going to have children?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes up all the time, but it's really interesting. So you would think, in fact, if you were the guy on the street, you're not the guy on the street, but if you were the guy on the street, you said, oh, you wrote a book about people who have a lot of kids. I got this question a lot. Do these people just not believe in birth control? There's almost like no dumber and more horrible question for like a contemporary woman, right? It's like we don't know where the kids are coming from, like we don't know how to stop it, right? So sure, you could plan your children using artificial means or using natural means. Some of the women I talked to planned their children using natural means. A couple. Now remember, most of the people I talked to are not Catholics. So most of the people I talked to had no moral objection to using artificial birth control. And this turned out to be tremendously helpful for me in terms of interpreting what we're looking at, right? So yeah, the Catholic women talked about it, but none of them would have said that was the reason they had 8 kids, is because they used natural family planning. I mean, like there's a joke about that, right? Like this is what Catholic birth control looks like. But there's something really terrible in that joke, right? Because the terrible thing in that joke is like natural family planning doesn't work.
The opposite.
Of course it works, right?
Or the opposite, say, why would I use natural family planning? I want to have a lot of children. I wouldn't do that either.
So listen, this is why it's very important. So what I heard, now, and I didn't know this before, this is like what you learn when you go out and talk to people. The story of people beating the odds, having children anyway, is a story about wanting children. It is a story about coming to see that children are a very great good. In my sample, you had women who were able to try for 10 or 12. And you had women who would have liked to have tried for 10 or 12, but could not do that for time reasons, for health reasons, for financial reasons. So in the context of seeing children as a very great good, there were different ways people got to their family size. So I think this is really important because for me it seemed to suggest that as a church we've spent a lot of time focusing, maybe rightly so, on explaining our teaching about natural family planning, but a lot less time focusing on the desirability of children, right? And you know who I heard this most profoundly from was our Jewish sisters. Yeah. So our Jewish sisters will say, look, as I understand it, there are three biggest blessings God wants to send us: wealth, health, and children. And the greatest of these is children. Why would you put up an obstacle to receive these blessings? One of them said, I don't think you could have too much of any of those things. Okay, so any of the women in the room who's had a couple of children, you will know, you're with me, right? Raise your hand. How many times have you been asked in public, are you done yet? Are you done yet? There's a general presumption in modernity that you could have too many children. You can't be wealthy enough. You can't be fit enough, right? You can't be too rich or too skinny. But you could definitely have too many children. So what I try to highlight is that there's the attitude of the Old Testament, the attitude of which is our scripture, which is a simple faith, which says children are like wealth, and you can't have too many of them. Now, if for reasons of health or financial exigency you have to stop at some point, you may do that, and you have licit means to do that. But what a great cross that would be, right? That's a very different way of thinking about it from the one that we're mostly used to. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We just turned it off for you.
Back on? You probably want to shut me off here in a second.
I'm sure I will, yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. Not many girls could even ask this question without being run over by a truck. But
are you identifying as a girl now? All right,
it's
keep
not
going.
that late yet. But did you mention a percentage of these women that you spoke with that were atheists? Were there any at all?
Yeah, there are some. I've been in correspondence with some. I looked for some for this study. I couldn't find any. I talked to the National Atheist Association. I said, you got any women in your group with a lot of kids? And the guy looked, he spent like a week. He's like, I don't have anybody. And this is true. And then he wrote to me and he said, but I think I know why. He said, I Googled it, and it turns out that like religious people have more kids than atheists. I was like, I know that. I said, that's why I came to you.
Weird.
He was stunned. So I do put in the book a chapter about the least religious woman that I interviewed. She and her husband are Jewish. They keep a Jewish household, she said. But she said explicitly, her words, the Jewish part is separate from the children part. We're not having kids because we're Jewish. We're not having kids because we think they're blessings.
I've heard the opposite.
Yeah.
A great story. I don't know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust necessarily. Maybe it was close to that. But a Jewish guy's walking through the airport with his like 7 kids, and somebody says exactly what you said. Are you done yet? And he's like, yeah, I don't think so. And it's like, how many do you want to have? He's like, 6 million. I thought it was pretty good response. But my real question is, you mentioned that that public policy has not done much to influence the number of births.
Yeah.
And I assume you mean here in the United States. And I'm not
anywhere.
sure what policies you mean to, but in Europe,
Yeah.
in some particular countries,
Yeah.
they're implementing
Yeah.
policies
Yes, they are.
encouraging women,
Yeah.
giving them longer paid time off, giving them relief from paying any income tax for the rest of their lives, free minivans,
Yeah.
zero.
I read about
zero
that.
income,
Yeah.
0% loans, and the birth rate has stopped dropping.
It's dropped
And
again.
it's popped up and down a little bit.
In 2023, Hungary's birth rate dropped again.
Yeah.
No, it
Yeah.
dropped. Yeah, it
Right.
didn't stop dropping.
But it's stopped dropping as much as some other parts of
No,
Europe.
it's back to dropping.
From 23?
Yeah, you're just
Okay.
not up to date. It's not going to work.
So nowhere else hasn't impacted anything.
no.
Okay.
No, look, I would like to tell you, look, I would like to be here. I mean, there's a little bit of schadenfreude when I saw the latest numbers on Hungary, like, because you're like, it's not going to work. And then the numbers come and you're like, I was right, it didn't work. It will not probably work. It doesn't mean it's a wrong thing to try. And what I mean by that is suppose a society says, look, we'd like to honor people having children. Now, if you've got money in the coffers, by all means do it. We don't have any money in our coffers. We are actually dead broke. And the reason we're all broke is because we stopped having children. So I would say, like, if you want to try it, have at it. But you're not going to talk people into having kids by giving them a free minivan. Like, right? I would like one, right? But, actually, I don't need a minivan anymore. I want something else.
I've got a question over
No,
here.
so because you're a good friend, I'm going to tease you a little bit. But to our knowledge, listen, Hungary's just recent, everybody's talking about it, and this is about a 10-year-old policy. We don't think it's worked. By the way, Hungary can't keep people in their border, so if you could just get them to have babies, but then you can't keep them from leaving Hungary because there's no jobs, I mean, this is silly, right? It's a silly stuff. Meaning it's not a problem countries can solve at that level. But countries have tried pronatalist policies for 40 years now. I mean, right, Korea's been crashing a lot earlier. And we don't know to this day of a country that successfully, meaningfully changed the birth rate collapse. I'd like to tell you something else, but yeah.
Thank you for your talk on the book. So you speak about 3 children being a very difficult number, and kind of out there, that's the max number that you can. Yeah, 2 it's already, but 3 is like definitely no more than that. Can you speak about why? Why do you think 3 is so difficult?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say everybody in this room can speak to anybody with it. But it's just like you're outnumbered, right? So now like people say you go from like man-to-man defense to zone defense, right? But they're all really little, and there's only 2 of you and there's 3 of them, and but when you keep going after that, what happens is the oldest one, they don't all stay little, right? The older ones get older. And by the time you have your 4th or your 5th, you don't even do anything anymore because the older ones are like playing. No, listen, I'm like exaggerating. But the complexity of 3 toddlers or 3 little kids really melts away. And if later you have a couple more toddlers, as your kids get older, they help. So you get better at it, and then the older ones help. So, yeah. That's basically the story. Okay.
This is on. Oh, it is on. Okay, great.
Yeah.
First of all, as a mother of a large family, I have 6 children myself. I
Great.
want to thank you,
Welcome.
first of all, for writing this book. And I think for not treating that 5% as just an outlier, but actually people who are making an intentional decision for
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you, as I know you are also a mother of a large family, what was the thing that was the most surprising or most interesting to you in your research for this?
Well, in a sense, my answer to the bishop is my answer. I mean, I did not know what I mean, I know why Catholic women do what they do, but I don't know why other people do what they do, right? So in a sense, that was like, here's what we know, and here's what we knew. I'm an economist, so we tend to think about things in a really simple way. We're like, well, if there's not enough of this thing, is this a supply problem or a demand problem, right? Okay, so we really didn't know the answer to that. And I could say that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but actually I could just pull out, article after article. Basically, since the 2008 financial crisis, we've got lots and lots of articles because the birth rates took another inflection point down, and everybody expected them to rebound when the economy rebounded. They didn't rebound. And so economists are all scratching their heads. We have no idea why this is happening, right? So you just don't know. You need to disentangle it. And the problem is children are interesting because unlike other things that you might demand, like a consumer good that you might demand, if a couple has to demand the thing, they also have to supply it, right? So it's not like anything else in that way. You don't just want a kid, you want your kid, right? So this makes it very difficult to disentangle the costs and the demand part of the problem. So there are some people saying, well, no, people still want the same number of children as ever before, but it's harder to have a child, right? So kind of after talking to enough people, sort of seeing that actually the story here, there is this cost problem, but it's the cost problem more of like what else you could do, right? But then it's a demand problem. So people don't want children that much. They don't want them that much. They want them the way they want to lose 5 pounds. Like, they want to lose 5 pounds, but not enough to skip dessert. Right? That's how much I want to lose 5 pounds, right? So it's like not enough to give up the other things that you would have to give up. This, you might say, was this not surprising? Of course, this is very surprising. I had no idea. I could not have put that into words before. So really, it's most of what I told you. You'd think I knew all that. I didn't know that. I just knew that I liked my kids, and I kept liking them. That was it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Catherine. For me, it seems that the point you made about wanting children being absolutely key, but that leads to thinking as to why is it only 5%. So I'm wondering whether in your research you've come across any negative forces that are driving against that. I don't know if you heard of the history of Romania. I thought that was a particularly interesting one.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a big question to answer. I'll try to just give you a couple things quickly, so as I know everybody wants to get to wine and cigars, as do I. So I focus on wanting children, right? So I think that this is like a simple thing. I think people do things because they need them or they want them. Right? When they need them, they want them also, right? But sometimes you want things that you don't need. All right, that sounded esoteric. All right, here's what I mean. In the early 1800s, you would have needed children. Right? You would have needed children in part to have extra hands around the house. Like, try getting water from the well if there's just the two of you. Like, it's really good to have extra people. And we could keep going. There's all kinds of reasons why extra hands are good. People are not very wealthy, and extra hands are great. In addition, if you didn't have children, you would not have a good retirement, right? Nobody would take care of you when you're old. So these are very important reasons why you need to have children. Essentially, the story of economic growth and then the modern state implies that we don't need to have children anymore. So what's left over is just whether you want to have children. Okay, so in other words, the people still having children today are people who want children. You asked about, I think, if I understood you, can states get in the way of the desire for children? 100%. So I think the best way to think about this is, as I've described, having children is really hard, so you have to have a really strong reason to want to do it. So I think this is like running a marathon. The state can't make anybody want to run a marathon. You have to get that from someplace else. It's transcendent. But can the state kneecap you and make it very difficult? Can it injure you in some way? And I think for sure it can. Right? And so obviously we can point to Romania, we can point to China, we can point to a lot of ways in which modern states have made childbearing like illegal, impossible, or frowned upon in lots of ways. So I think that's a legacy we have to face and confront, right? And certainly legalized abortion, promotion of family planning, in all kinds of ways condones and encourages a mindset which makes children look less desirable. So 100%, states can suppress and put obstacles in the way of childbearing. But if you remove all those obstacles, do you get childbearing to spring back without faith? No, you don't. And look, we're seeing this in like the Eastern Bloc countries now, right? Look at Poland's birth rates are close to being the lowest in Europe right now, which everybody's stunned by. So, Jeremy, I know it was like we were done, but I think that's you, right? There's a glare. Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. Catherine, amazing work. Thank you. I could tell just by Erin's look. She wants to have baby 7 after hearing your talk. So thank you. Connections to education. If the people themselves were homeschooled, or Christian school or Catholic school, did that make an impact on their openness to life?
Yes, yes. This is not a representative sample, but that's my next book. Yes, yeah. So I'd like to be able to tell you that we know at a large level that private Christian, that essentially private religiously inspired schooling makes a difference in passing that on to the next generation. I've seen it in small samples, but I don't have. Yeah, if anybody wants to fund that study, come see me later. That's a very important question. There's a little bit of work looking at the transmission of desire for children from one generation to the next. Looking at European data, and I looked at it and I said that's not trustworthy because there's like no religious schooling in Europe. So we don't have the data that we need to answer that question fully. But in small studies, the answer is 100% yes. And in my study, the answer is 100% yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, folks.
Oh, okay.
Folks, thanks for being here tonight, and buy the book. It's terrific. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.